My name is Lucinda, and I'm 41 years old. I work as a cleaner for a large company that cleans corporate offices. I have been here for 19 years now, and it will soon be 21 years since I first stepped over the threshold of one of these sparkling glass buildings with a bucket full of detergents and an old rag in my hand. I once decided to choose this path because I needed to take care of my mother, who was seriously ill. We were a small family, my mom, me, and my younger brother. Our mother raised us alone and became our only source of support and warmth. She was strict but fair, and she was able to convey to us how important honesty, work, and mutual assistance are. When my mother began to lose her health, I was still a teenager. I studied at vocational school and had youthful dreams in front of me, but her illness forced me to put these dreams on pause. I dropped out of school and found a job that allowed me to stay close to my mother and take care of her, take her to doctors, provide necessary appointments and procedures. My salary was modest, but I was grateful that the job did not require constant presence and gave me the opportunity to be there at the most necessary moments. Many years have passed since then. I still remember the smell of medicine and the silence that enveloped our apartment when my mother was already very weak. She left quietly, like people who have been ill for a long time and left everything they could for their children. She was in her early 40s at the time, and I was 23. Autumn gradually gave way to winter, and her departure left a void in my soul, so dark and cold that I seemed to be drowning. My younger brother, who was only 18 at the time, was in college, and his face was full of confusion and pain. I understood that I had to be a support for him, because he lost his mother before he had time to grow up, and I became the person for him who would help him get back on his feet. Work has become not just a duty for me, but something like a support. Colleagues, seeing my feelings, always tried to support me, said, "Lucinda, honey, everything will be fine." They gave me space to grieve when it was necessary, and patiently waited until I could focus on my duties again. In those days, I sometimes hated my job, but I couldn't quit it either, because for me it was something that helped me stay afloat and bring in the money I needed to support my brother. Several years have passed. My brother graduated from college, and I tried to be not only a sister for him, but also a mother. I paid for his study materials, brought him home late at night when he stayed late in class, and tried to organize his daily life. One day, when he got his first job, I bought him a suit as a holiday gift. This costume cost me a lot of effort and savings, but I was proud that I was able to support him at an important moment. The memory of my brother, who was once so sincerely grateful for my work and my support, stood before my eyes as I listened to his words, imbued with a new status and pride, sometimes mixed with cold mockery. His new job at a large corporation brought him success and confidence, but behind that confidence seemed to grow something sharper, something bittersweet. Now that his superiors appreciated his zeal and abilities, it was as if he began to feel superior to others, as if the whole world suddenly owed him for his achievements. This became noticeable not only in his attitude towards me, but also in the way he spoke about colleagues, friends, and acquaintances who did not work in respectable places. With each passing month, his successes became an occasion for a new conversation. He was happy to share the results of projects that had been entrusted to him, often mentioning how lucky he was to be in the right company at the right time. But then another note rose, heavy and disappointing. He increasingly complained that his colleagues were not working fast enough or did not have the right level for their common cause. These conversations, once filled with warmth and joy, now turned into sarcastic comments and indifference to the people around them. One day, when I tried to gently remind him that perhaps his colleagues needed more time and support, he abruptly cut me off. "Little sister, you probably consider yourself a connoisseur of work and success, despite the fact that you've spent your whole life with a rag and a mop." These words, uttered with a grin and slippery cold, hit me harder than I could have expected. I stood in front of our mother's portrait, feeling the same pain as the day she left us. Waiting for warmth, understanding, was useless. The brother who once rejoiced at my efforts turned into a stranger to me. Subsequently, his attitude towards his work only worsened. Now that he had soared higher than he had ever dreamed of, He began to consider himself somewhat exceptional, as if his abilities had raised him above everyone else. Over time, I tried to talk to him as little as possible, especially after meeting his future wife. She was young, and I immediately felt that she seemed to come from another world, a world in which every success is an excuse for condescension towards others. During our first acquaintance, she looked at me with a faint smile, as if she was amused by my clothes and the work bag with cleaning equipment that I took with me after a long day at work. She nodded politely at the greeting, but her eyes shone with the same cold condescension that I had already seen in my brother. When the conversation turned to my work, she suddenly asked, "So you're really a cleaner?" This question sounded somehow different, not as simple curiosity, but as something more, as condemnation hidden under curiosity. I replied that yes, I do work as a cleaner, and that it brings me pleasure. To this, she coldly remarked that such work probably smelled bad. The words hung in the air like something dirty that she thought I'd brought with me from my work world. I froze for a moment when I heard my brother say with genuine amazement, "A guy? Seriously?" There was a tinge of disbelief in his voice, as if the fact that someone might be interested in me had come as a surprise to him. But I decided to take advantage of this moment and replied with gentle irony, "Yes, boy, can you imagine? And he's a wonderful man." The pause that arose in the conversation seemed to be filled with everything that I could not express to him in words: my desire to finally have something of my own, the warmth that I always lacked, and the light that I so wanted to bring into my life. After a short silence, my brother finally found the words, but what he said sounded more like a joke. "So have you taken better care of yourself?" For a second I thought about how to respond to this, but I couldn't help but laugh a little and decided to support his mood. "Well, in a way, yes," I said. "He said he really liked my smile and the way I take care of my skin. I can tell he fell in love with me at first sight." My brother may have been confused, but he immediately found a way to translate this into his usual channel. "Well, this is clearly my merit," he said, not hiding his pride. "I've always told you that you need to take more care of yourself." I had no choice but to let him take at least some of my happiness to himself this time, realizing that he probably sees this as his last achievement. To some extent, maybe he was right. After all his comments, hidden and explicit, I really thought about my appearance. But it wasn't just that. My interest in myself, my appearance and my life gradually grew, starting with small steps, and now it was full of new meanings. My brother's words, which seemed to be spoken in jest, echoed in my head, and every moment their lightness, mixed with a subtle shade of neglect, revealed to me in a completely new light. For the first time, I thought about what he really sees in me, how he perceives me, his older sister, who left dreams and education for him, who paved the way step by step so that he could build a future without unnecessary worries and worries. I listened to his voice confidently spread over the phone, and imagined him sitting at a massive desk in a bright, luxurious office, his gaze directed towards the horizon outside the windows of a high-rise building, like many people engaged in large corporate affairs. He certainly grew up, turning from the naive and joyful boy I always remembered him to a confident man, negotiating, making deals and, apparently, confident that the world belongs to him. I was certainly proud of his success, but at the same time I felt sadness in the depths of my soul, sadness for the connection that once existed between us. The connection where he knew how much his education cost me, how I took great care of his every step, how I tried so that he would not feel the emptiness left by his mother. Now, he seemed to have neglected that past, as if it didn't exist at all. His words, accidentally dropped in conversation, connected to her, and, I can't help it, sounded insulting and even cruel. They came out of his mouth so quickly, so without hesitation, that I suddenly realized that they had had their place in his mind for a long time. I imagined myself in his mind, a cleaner, a tired woman who has not found anything more worthy in life and therefore is not of interest to the world in which he now lives. But for him, I was obliged to rejoice in his successes and listen to his stories with the same attention as before, without asking for anything in return. For a moment, I just wanted to cut the conversation short, Hang up the phone and let him go. Let him go with his corporate ambitions, business relationships, and this new way of looking at the world. But something inside me stopped me from taking such a rash step. Perhaps it was the memory of my mother, her tired but gentle eyes that looked at us for the last time on that gray and cold winter day when she was destined to leave. I remembered her quiet voice, which she used to tell me when she found out about her illness. "Take care of him, Lucinda. He is still a boy and will not be able to withstand all that has befallen us." These words, uttered with almost hopeless sadness, remained a heavy burden in my heart. And even now, years later, I still felt that responsibility, to protect, to care, to love, even if there was no trace of that love now. Bending my head to the receiver, I answered my brother gently, as if addressing him in those old days, when he was still that little boy reaching out to me for support. "You're right," I said, trying not to betray the pain, but my voice still trembled slightly. Maybe if I took more care of myself, everything would be different. But with every word, a protest rose in me, and I added a little more sharply, "But, you know, life is not always about appearance or high income. Sometimes caring, kindness, and support mean much more." My brother probably thought it was strange that I brought it up, but he didn't say anything, and I took advantage of the pause to continue, calmly but firmly now, "Maybe you'll understand this one day." I heard him laugh, but there was no mockery in that laugh anymore, but rather uncertainty mixed with a note of resentment. Perhaps he realized that this time my remark was not just an answer, but something more, that at that moment I really made it clear to him that I always knew his thoughts, his attitude towards me, and even his unreasonable confidence that I would stay in my place and be satisfied with his success, no matter how arrogant he was. I caught him opening his mouth to say something, but he changed his mind, sighed, and his voice changed, becoming a little softer. "Okay, Lucinda. Maybe you're right." We both knew that this was a rare moment of revelation, when two people, bound by blood, look at each other through a crack that has formed over the years. At that moment, he remained my family, no matter what, and even though I was just a cleaner, whom he probably did not respect, I knew that deep down he understood how much his well-being and success meant to me. That day, standing at the entrance to the luxurious office building where my brother worked, I felt a strange mixture of feelings. My usual work uniform, a thick blue uniform and heavy rubber gloves, seemed especially heavy on me, as if it reflected not only my duties, but also the weight of the memories that I carried with me. The building I was heading to was certainly impressive. The tall glass facades, sparkling in the sun, reflected the bustle of the city. Inside, in the lobby, the air was filled with a light aroma of expensive perfumes, mixed with the cleanliness and cold of the air-conditioned space. Everything here embodied success, well-being, comfort, everything that had become so important to my brother and that he apparently considered the pinnacle of happiness. Taking a deep breath, as if in a familiar ritual, I tightened the belt on the work cart and pushed it forward, stepping on the marble floor, which had only recently been polished and shone like a mirror. Passing by the spacious foyer, I accidentally met the eyes of the secretary at the reception desk, a young, brightly dressed girl with perfect hair and flawless makeup. She glanced at me briefly, not even thinking that she could see anything in me other than a cleaner. I've been used to these looks for a long time, but this time, perhaps because of a whole tense situation with my brother, I felt the girl's gaze penetrate my skin, exposing all those unresolved emotions that I kept inside. I had to walk through long corridors filled with subdued light and strict design, ivory walls covered with graphics in metal frames, narrow strips of lamps built into the ceiling, and office doors made of frosted glass. I knew that somewhere in those featureless, cold walls my brother was sitting, probably immersed in his own affairs right now, unaware that I was walking very close. It seemed that even the building itself breathed his world, so far away and at the same time so painfully familiar, because I was part of its foundation, its beginning, even if now he did not remember it. As I was pushing the cart, I suddenly caught my reflection in the glass partition. She froze for a moment, looking at herself as if she were a stranger. Gray strands in her hair, dark circles under her eyes, slightly slumped shoulders, all this spoke of long years of work, sleepless nights, caring for others, and unwillingness to bother others with their problems. I remembered how I once imagined my life differently, dreamed of a world where I could do something more sublime. But then the changes came, and I had to give up myself for others. Some employee passing by suddenly stopped, as if recognizing me, and I turned to him with a smile on duty. But he just nodded, pointing to one of the rooms where I needed to clean up, and I nodded back, already immersed in my work. Thoughts about his brother became fewer, as if retreating under the influence of monotonous movement and the sounds of rags on surfaces. They gradually dissolved into the silence of empty corridors. However, thoughts were always with me. This was their peculiarity. They returned as soon as the work stopped absorbing my attention completely. At some point, I heard a familiar voice behind one of the glass doors. It was my brother. He was talking to someone on the phone, and I could tell from his tone that he was discussing another deal or work project again. The voice was loud, confident, and sometimes even harsh. There was no trace of the softness and warmth that had once been his constant companions. Listening to him, I suddenly felt the sharp pain of loss, the loss of the brother I knew and raised. This man behind the glass door, with his even, cold tone and distinct confidence in his words, seemed almost a stranger to me. And yet he was a part of me, a part of my story. I tried to suppress the urge to knock on the door, meet him face to face, to tell him everything that had accumulated inside, all the bitterness that I felt because of his attitude. But at that moment, I realized that it was unlikely that he would understand. His world was too far away from mine now. I didn't need an apology, I didn't need his confession. I just wanted him to know that a person is not determined only by where he works and how much he earns. But how can I convey this when every meeting or conversation we had turned into only pain? I turned away from the glass partition and, pursing my lips, headed down the corridor. I continued to methodically wipe the leaves of the ornamental plants in the main lobby, allowing the noise and bustle of the office space to blend into the background. But my gaze kept returning to the figure of my brother, who was standing against the wall, depressed, as if he had escaped from something bigger than himself. My hands, busy with their usual work, moved automatically, and my thoughts circled around everything that had recently happened between us. It seemed that quite recently he was full of self-confidence, looking condescendingly at me and those who were engaged in his opinion, dirty work. And now he looked like he was in someone's eyes as small and insignificant as he was used to seeing others. A senior colleague standing nearby was watching the proceedings with restraint. He seemed to sense my inner struggle without even knowing the details. I heard him say softly, as if talking to himself, "You know, sometimes fate returns people to their own actions. They just have to learn to live with it." He didn't say it with condemnation, but rather with sad wisdom, as if there was longing in his voice for his own past, for something that he had once experienced on his own skin. There was something soothing in my colleague's words, and I suddenly felt relieved that I was not alone in the face of this internal struggle. At that moment, I looked up at my brother again, and saw how he was tensely watching the elevator, waiting for his colleague to return. He stood hunched over, his eyes darting, and his fingers nervously tugged at the cuffs of his shirt. This small, nervous rigidity of his movements, gestures so unusual for a previously self-confident person now seemed powerless in front of the reality that surrounded him. He looked like a stranger not only to me, but perhaps to himself as well. I remembered how he once told me that success is all that matters, that people who have not reached the heights are responsible for it themselves. He always despised weakness, was ready to do a lot in order to take his legitimate position. But here he is, a loser in the eyes of others, without support, crushed by his own ideals. I turned away silently, trying to find my balance. After all, despite everything that happened, he remained my brother, a part of my life, my past. He was my only close person in this world, the one who always knew me better than others, who remembered me from the time when we were just children playing in the yard. But at the same time, I understood that he was already a different person, that our paths had diverged so much that they might not be able to cross again. A few minutes later, the elevator opened and my brother's younger colleague got out, carrying a bag that he had left upstairs. Handing it to him with businesslike coldness, the young man did not even look at my brother, staring ahead as if he were just a shadow. My brother took the bag with a slight jerk of his head and thanked him quietly. This short "thank you" seemed so awkward and unnatural to me that I felt bitterness, barely restraining myself from laughing. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that he was not used to the situation, to the fact that someone could ignore him, look down on him, as he once did. When they both left, I was left alone in this huge, cold space filled with the whispers of conversations, the rustle of footsteps, the ringing of phones. This space became a kind of arena where people came and went, met and said goodbye, but each time they remained strangers. I was looking towards where my brother had disappeared through the glass doors, and at that moment I was overwhelmed by the feeling that this meeting, this accident, had happened for a reason. Inside, I had a growing sense of the rightness of my actions, of my choice, to go my own way, not to try to convince or save someone who does not want to change. The senior colleague came up to me again, this time silently, but with some deep understanding in his eyes. He nodded in the direction where my brother had been standing recently and said softly, as if in forgiveness, "Don't judge him harshly. Sometimes people realize their own mistakes only through pain. Maybe this is his chance." My brother, shocked by the revelation, could barely hide his confusion. He tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. His face grew paler and paler as he gradually realized the scale of his oversight and failure. His hand twitched nervously, as if he was about to wipe the sweat from his forehead, but stopped when he noticed our gazes. He met my boyfriend for the first time, and this acquaintance turned into a public humiliation for him. The gray-haired man standing next to me looked at my brother with an expression in which there was a slight mockery and unexpected sympathy, as if he was watching not an adult, but an audacious but unreasonable child who was facing a difficult lesson. He gently put his hand on my shoulder again, making it clear that he fully supported me, and said, calmly but firmly, "I understand that you are here for work." His voice sounded muffled, but without a single trembling note. However, sometimes the boundaries of work and personal life overlap. And the respect we show to others is always a testament to our inner dignity. Your sister deserves more respect than you are willing to give her. My brother tried to smile weakly, as if hoping that this was all just a bad joke, but his face betrayed inner confusion and shame. I looked at him and tried to figure out where the line was where our paths parted. When did he become the person for whom position, status, and appearance became more important than family ties and human respect? When did our relationship cease to mean anything to him? He cast a sidelong glance at my boyfriend, as if searching for an answer in him, and finally found the strength to squeeze out the words. I didn't know you worked here," he muttered, looking away again. "I thought." He broke off, and there was something like regret in his voice, but it was immediately replaced by intense pride. "You know that's not what I meant. I just wanted to say that." "What did you want to say?" My boyfriend calmly interrupted him, and there was a slight irony in his voice. "What if someone works as a cleaner? They deserve less respect. Or that any dirty job makes a person dirty? I would advise you to be careful in your judgments. Our world is a network of connections and work, where everyone puts in something, and there is no humiliating or insignificant work. Your sister realized all this a long time ago." My brother froze, realizing that there was no way to argue with this man, that his previous words had now been completely destroyed. It seems that he realized the depth of his neglect, his complacency, from which he always confidently repelled. And now he stands in front of those whom he was recently ready to devalue. His career, his very position begin to seem shaky to him, barely holding on to the level of his own contradictory beliefs. A shadow of realization seemed to flicker across his brother's face. Perhaps this was the first attempt to see the world beyond his limited judgments. I turned to my boyfriend, who, seeing all this, shrugged his shoulders, as if saying that further words were meaningless. My brother continued to stand in the center of the lobby, as if waiting for someone to break up the tense atmosphere and resolve his internal conflict. Standing in the lobby and watching my brother humbly bow his head in front of me, I felt a whole whirlpool of feelings, fleeting regret, relief, and most importantly, inner peace, as if some long smoldering tension had finally found its resolution. Our conversation passed like a quiet storm, and when my colleagues, the cleaners from other floors, began to gather around us, I noticed respect and understanding in the eyes of many. They, like me, knew what it meant to work daily and contribute to the cleanliness and order of this place, even if sometimes without unnecessary words of gratitude. My brother, who had always lived as if the world owed him something, could hardly meet my eyes now. His shoulders hunched, and his voice, when he mumbled an apology, was weak and barely distinguishable, as if every word was given to him through force. After making sure that he was seen, his humiliation became obvious to everyone. He turned around and left the lobby, leaving behind only a shadow of his former self-confidence and a dull feeling of final reckoning. After this incident, everything changed. My brother, whom I now saw in a completely different light after so many years, was soon transferred to a branch of a subsidiary company. This transfer was his defeat, which had no way back. His colleagues no longer trusted him, and the company's management realized that his previous achievements were nothing more than a temporary illusion. A few months passed, and one day, quite unexpectedly, his wife came to my house. I remember her standing on the threshold, pale, with trembling lips and eyes full of tears. There was hope in her eyes for the last chance. She begged me, as a sister, to help bring her husband back to the head office, said that she could not pay the mortgage for their newly purchased house, that she was desperate, afraid of losing everything. But I looked at her and saw a man as alien to me now as her husband. With a heavy heart, I told her no and offered to leave, realizing that this would not stop her from loving my brother, but this door closed for me. They really had to sell their house, and a new, bitter stage of life came for them. But I no longer had any feelings for them, as if I had let them go along with all the memories from the past. And my life has changed in ways I never dreamed of. A few years later, when our esteemed CEO retired, unexpectedly for everyone and, first of all, for myself, I was chosen as his successor. This decision caused a lot of talk. Some colleagues were surprised, others were frankly unhappy. But the CEO has known me for many years and understood that I, like no one else, know and love the company. I was one of those who started from the very basics, who understood the importance of every corner in the building, who felt the rhythm of work and was able to appreciate the work of each employee. After accepting this position, I hesitated for a long time. I had a huge responsibility, but inside I knew that this was the place where I could do the most good. So, even after becoming president, I did not leave the habit of personally controlling the order in the offices, sometimes staying longer and helping the new ones. Every day, when I entered the building, I saw my path, a path full of overcoming, struggle and victories.